The rain had stopped hours ago, but Sarah Mitchell still sat in her car outside the hospital, knuckles white against the steering wheel, unable to move. Through the windshield, she watched strangers come and go through the automated doors, each carrying their own private storms. Some walked out crying. Others emerged with the kind of hollow-eyed exhaustion that comes from keeping vigil through the night. She belonged to neither group. She belonged nowhere at all. The doctor's words still echoed in her skull like a cruel metronome. Stage 4. 6 months, maybe less.
I'm so sorry.
At 42, Sarah had built a life she was proud of. She'd clawed her way up from nothing, working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school, eventually becoming a nurse practitioner at a community clinic in North Philadelphia. Her apartment was small but hers. Her debts were finally paid. She'd even started dating again after her divorce 3 years ago. The future had begun to look like something other than survival. And now this: ovarian cancer, advanced, aggressive, and according to Dr. Chen's carefully measured words, unlikely to respond to treatment. The worst part wasn't the death sentence. It was the loneliness. No children, no siblings. Her parents had passed years ago, and most of her friendships had withered during the all-consuming years of her failed marriage and its aftermath. She had colleagues, sure, and a few acquaintances she'd grab coffee with once in a while, but no one who would hold her hand while she died. No one who would remember her name a year after she was gone. Sarah finally started the car and drove home on autopilot, barely registering the familiar streets. Inside her apartment, she collapsed on the couch and did something she hadn't done in years. She prayed. Not to any particular god, just out into the universe. A desperate whisper into the void. Please, don't let me disappear like I never existed. Let me matter. Let me leave something behind. The next morning, Sarah called in sick for the first time in 3 years. She sat at her kitchen table, with her laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold while she stared at the screen. If she had 6 months, what could she do with them? The question felt impossibly heavy. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. She couldn't endow scholarships, or fund medical research or leave behind some grand legacy. Then she remembered Mrs. Patterson. Gladys Patterson had been one of Sarah's patients 2 years ago, a 78-year-old widow with congestive heart failure, who lived alone in a row house not far from the clinic. Sarah had gone above and beyond for her, making house calls on her days off, helping her organize her medications, even grocery shopping when Mrs. Patterson was too weak to leave her home. They'd never talked about it as anything more than what it was: one human being helping another. Mrs. Patterson had died peacefully in her sleep. 8 months later, and Sarah had attended her funeral. Only 4 other people had been there, but Sarah still thought about her. She remembered Mrs. Patterson's laugh, the way she'd hum old jazz standards while watering her plants, her stories about working as a seamstress in the garment district. Mrs. Patterson had mattered to Sarah. She hadn't disappeared. That was when the idea struck. Sarah spent the next week researching and planning with an energy she hadn't felt since before her diagnosis. She created a simple website, nothing fancy, just a single page with a form. The site was called Title Her, and its purpose was elegantly simple. People could submit the names of women who had impacted their lives, women who might otherwise be forgotten by history. A grandmother who survived impossible odds, a teacher who changed everything, a neighbor who showed up when no one else did, a friend who listened without judgment. Sarah would collect these stories and create a permanent digital memorial. Each woman would get her own page with her story, her photo if available, and most importantly, her name. Title her. Give her the recognition she deserved. Let her be seen, be remembered, be honored. The project consumed Sarah's remaining energy. On her good days, she worked for hours, designing the site, setting up the submission system, creating a template for the memorial pages. On bad days, when the cancer made itself known with waves of nausea and bone-deep exhaustion, she worked anyway, even if it was just for 20 minutes at a time. She launched the site on a Tuesday with no fanfare, just a simple post on her personal Facebook page and a few local community groups. She didn't mention her diagnosis. She didn't explain why she was doing this. She just asked people to submit their stories. The first submission came from a woman in Seattle whose mother had worked 3 jobs to keep her Kids fed after their father left. The second was from a man in Atlanta, honoring his fifth-grade teacher who'd noticed he was dyslexic when everyone else had written him off as stupid. The third was from a teenager in Chicago whose aunt had taken her in when her own parents kicked her out for being gay. By the end of the first week, Sarah had 50 submissions. By the end of the month, she had over 300. The stories poured in from across the country, each one a testament to quiet heroism, to women who had loved fiercely and sacrificed willingly, and changed lives without ever seeking credit. Sarah read every single story, often through tears. She created every memorial page with meticulous care, treating each woman's story as sacred. Some submissions included photos, grainy and faded, pulled from old albums or scanned from newspaper clippings. Others had no photos at all, just names and stories. Sarah titled each page with the woman's name in bold letters, giving them the recognition they'd been denied in life. As the weeks passed and her body weakened, something unexpected happened. People started reaching out to Sarah directly, not just with submissions, but with gratitude. They thanked her for creating a space for these stories. They told her the site had helped them process their grief or reconnect with family members or simply feel less alone. A woman in Oregon said that creating a page for her deceased sister had been more healing than years of therapy. A man in Florida said he'd printed out his grandmother's page and framed it for his mother's birthday, and she'd cried for an hour. The site started getting attention. A local news station in Philadelphia did a segment on it. Then a blogger with a large following wrote about it. Then a national morning show featured Sarah's story in their Good News segment. Sarah, too sick now to return to work, watched from her couch as the number of submissions exploded into the thousands, then tens of thousands. But it wasn't the numbers that mattered to Sarah. It was the emails and messages she received late at night when she couldn't sleep through the pain. A woman wrote to say that seeing her mother's name on the site, officially recognized and honored, had helped her finally accept her death. A man said that reading the stories had inspired him to reach out to his estranged sister. A teenager said the site had made her realize her own mother was a hero, even if she'd never thought of her that way before. Sarah had thought she'd be remembered for the site itself, for creating something that would outlast her. But as spring turned to summer and her body continued its decline, she realized she'd gotten it backward. The site wasn't about her at all. It was about all of these women. These thousands of women who had loved and sacrificed and changed the world in small, profound ways. Sarah wasn't building a monument to herself. She was building a monument to them, and in doing so, she was proving that every single life mattered, including her own. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, visited Sarah 3 times a week now. On a humid July morning, Patricia found Sarah at her laptop as always, working on memorial pages despite being barely able to sit up. "You should be resting," Patricia said gently. "I am resting," Sarah said with a weak smile. "This is rest for me." Patricia sat down beside her. "Can I ask you something? Why do you call it Title Her?" Sarah closed her eyes, thinking. "Because every woman deserves a title. Not Mrs. or Miss or whatever society decides to call us, but a real title. Hero, survivor, fighter, believer, teacher, friend. We spend our whole lives being defined by our relationships to other people, by what we do for others. I wanted to give these women their own identities, their own recognition. Title her, honor her, see her, remember her name." In her final weeks, Sarah's small apartment, filled with flowers and cards, from people she'd never met. People whose mothers and grandmothers and aunts and friends were now immortalized on Title Her. A teenage girl from Texas drove 12 hours to Philadelphia just to sit with Sarah for an afternoon and thank her for honoring her late foster mother. A group of women in Boston organized a fundraiser to hire a web developer to maintain the site in perpetuity. Volunteers from across the country reached out, offering to help manage submissions and create pages so the work could continue. Sarah Mitchell died on a Saturday morning in late August with Patricia holding her hand. She was 43 years old. Her obituary ran in the Philadelphia Inquirer, but more importantly, her story spread across Title Her, submitted by the same hospice nurse who had cared for her, who had witnessed the impact of her final act of service. The site continued to grow after Sarah's death, maintained by a devoted team of volunteers who understood her vision. Within a year, It had featured over 100,000 women. Within 2 years, it had become an archive, a library, a testament to the power of recognition and remembrance. But perhaps the most profound legacy was the quieter one. In living rooms and at kitchen tables across the country, people began really seeing the women in their own lives. They started expressing gratitude out loud. They started taking photos and recording stories before it was too late. They started understanding that the woman making their lunch, driving them to school, working the night shift so they could have what they needed, that woman was a hero, worthy of a title all her own. Sarah Mitchell had wanted to matter, to leave something behind. In the end, she didn't just create a website. She created a movement, a shift in consciousness, a reminder that every life tells a story worth preserving. She proved that even in our darkest moments, when we feel most invisible and forgotten, we have the power to light up the world. All it takes is seeing someone, really seeing them, and giving them the one thing every human being deserves: to be remembered, to be honored, to be titled.